What's up? Welcome back to 90s week here on Final Fan TV. We're talking about Final Fantasy 2. Now, Vinny, let's travel back. Let's travel back to 1991. All right, so 1991 in Japan, October 29th, 1991, Final Fantasy 4 was released. Now, by this time, obviously, Japan had already had 3 Final Fantasy games. In fact, I forgot to mention in the last video, there were 3 Final Fantasy games before Final Fantasy 1 hit North America, and that's why it was called Final Fantasy 1. This is the first time North America was getting it. So, Final Fantasy 2 comes out in November 23rd, 1991, so just 1 month after the Japan release, but of course it was called Final Fantasy 2. So, Final Fantasy 2, we don't have any gaming articles today, but we do have a fun commercial that we can look at and maybe even like talk about the game a little bit. So let's go take a look at the commercial. All right.
I just want to go on record that I hate that it's called Final Fantasy 2 at this point in time instead of Final Fantasy 4. Right. I hate it so much.
I
hate that 6 is 3.
I know. I imagine like going back in time, right? So if you go back in time, it looks bad looking at it now. But if you're back in the 90s, I would be 1 year old, you know, 1 year old. I would be playing Final Fantasy every day. No, I'm just kidding.
I would. I wasn't born yet, though.
Okay. so you know, you're living in the 90s, man. You'd never even heard of Final Fantasy before because you got to think, internet, dude. We were alive when the internet was invented, dude. That's how old we are. Anyway, so the internet wasn't around. You know, so you don't really know what's going on over there in the gaming world in Japan, right? So you don't know Final Fantasy even exists. So Final Fantasy comes on over, you would be so confused if it was called Final Fantasy 3 or 4. So Final Fantasy 1 gets its release, and that was indeed actually Final Fantasy 1, and like both versions of that game are the same-ish. So now we go ahead, we skip over to 1991, November 23rd, Final Fantasy 2 for North Americas, because like if they would have called it Final Fantasy 4, dude, you can imagine that's a little confusing for somebody to be like, yo, I just beat 1 last year. What is 4? What? So it kind of makes sense. They should have just re-released 2 and 3 in North America and just caught up. But this is also at the time, Vinny, when games were being released yearly. Like Final Fantasy was on a yearly schedule. Isn't that insane?
It is, especially because, you know, it worked for them, but it doesn't work for developers like Call of Duty. I mean, it works for them, but it shouldn't work for them.
It shouldn't. And this game is like,
it shouldn't.
They basically write this. I mean, obviously, of course, it's Super Nintendo days. You know, it's a little easier. But you're writing these complex stories, man. Like Final Fantasy 4 was written and developed, I'm assuming, in like a year after. I'm sorry, I should say a year after the previous game, which is just crazy to think, right? I'm sure the game was in development probably a little bit before, blah blah blah. I don't have those actual numbers, but
also don't forget that Final Fantasy was coming off the cusp of a series of failed games by Sakaguchi.
Right.
So, like, to go from several failed games and then to go from blockbuster hits of Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 4, just
insane,
subsequently, man. Year after year, it's crazy that they didn't need more time. Like, they had this in the chamber, and this is just how it played out. But you know what? I'm glad it played out the way it did.
Now, it's coming from YouTube user Retro Tony. Just want to give credit here. I'm just watching this commercial from YouTube user Retro Tony. So here we go. Let's take a look at this old commercial. Let me know if you have audio. Audio work? Good. All right, cool. All right, let's take a look at this commercial. Already right off the bat, I heard the, you know, like, let's go. It's time for Final Fantasy 2. You know, it's gonna rock your socks. Here we go.
That music.
Okay, Dad, I just want to finish this game. Okay, Dad, I'm coming. Yeah, I'm almost at the end. What happened to summer?
What happened to summer?
It ain't over
Oh.
till it's over.
There's Final Fantasy Legend.
I'm glad to see that nothing's changed. You know what I mean? Nothing's changed.
Right.
Okay, Dad.
like how-
All right, I'm coming. I gotta finish this game.
I like how they threw Final Fantasy Legend in there too. Like just real quick.
Yeah, real quick. Hey, you can also grab it on the Game Boy. Drakey, great point there. Great eye. They actually spoiled the final boss. Once again, nothing's changed. with these trailers, isn't that right? You know what I mean? Square out here dropping some big spoilers in their trailers. So here we go. Let's watch it one more time. It's only 30 seconds. So.
Okay, Dad, I
Just the goofiness, right? I love the goofiness. Like it's just like,
I know it's like, it's so, it feels Nickelodeon, like early
Yeah.
90s Nickelodeon to me.
oh man! And you pointed out in the beginning, if we could have had that transition, the slime, like the green slime, that would have been perfect.
finish this game. Okay, Dad, I'm coming.
I mean, the messaging is there.
What happened to summer?
What happened
Final
to Summer?
Fantasy.
Yeah, Game Boy.
It ain't over till it's over.
Yeah, Game Boy.
Chill out, Dad.
Chill out, Dad. I didn't catch that last time.
And
I didn't catch that. Chill out, Dad.
that TV, it was like, it just reminds me of when I was younger. I had a gigantic picture tube TV, like, 55-inch TV back then was like 450 pounds. Like those things were
Right, those
heavy.
big CRT things. Oh my
Right.
god, dude, that's amazing. Let me see if I can pronounce that name. Simonion.
Simon.
We'll call him Simi. What's up, Simi? Or Noarge. No, Noargor. Simi. Anyways, that background
Simon?
music and vibe couldn't be more different from Final Fantasy IV. He's so true. So true. Yeah, it's so true. Spoiled the boss. What did you think of the commercial after it played? Were you just as excited after it played? I love the
What?
commercials. Like I was talking to
game?
Simi.
Oh,
Yeah. Dude, that's
they just
chill out, Dad. The twins are turning the stone, and I'm crying, Dad. Ah, don't come
not
in.
like that.
Get out, Dad. Ah.
got like that 90s like alternative metal
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with like the high fantasy feel of
That
Final
attitude,
Fantasy.
man. It was all about attitude. It was all about like that edgy, like in your face, especially video games, which was kind of at the time like a rebel thing to do, right? You know, like you were kind of being a rebellious kid if you're just stuck inside playing video games all day.
Another thing,
Yeah.
they showed very little of the game. The commercial was more geared like
Like
It
towards
was-
that like in your face stuff, but like
Okay,
they
Dad,
show
I'm gonna
some
finish-
they show some gameplay there. You know, you
Look.
get to see a little bit.
look, all right, so there's maybe about 6 seconds of gameplay. Look,
I like how
right
they
there, and then they transition again.
And then let's just transition over. Yeah.
And then
Dude, I
the
can't
final
believe
boss,
that.
and then
What happened to summer?
Final Fantasy.
that's it. They just show you moving a little bit, and then the final hit on the final boss, and then
Yeah.
it's more driven towards showing you, like, look how much fun this guy's having, instead of showing you how much fun you can have. And that was like a lot to do with the 90s. Like, they'd advertise toys, but they wouldn't show you like how they worked. It was just kids having fun holding the toy. It's like, wow, I love Bop It.
Oh my god, it's Bop It! Look,
It's
Final Fantasy
Bop It.
Legend 2, let's throw that in there. Did you ever play any of the Game Boy, like Final Fantasy Legends, Adventure?
I did not play Legends, no.
Did you play Adventure by
I
any
played
chance?
Mystic Quest.
Mystic
No, I didn't play
Quest.
Adventure either.
We should talk about Mystic Quest. Like, do you want to just talk about Mystic Quest right now? Because that came out, when did that come out?
That came out a month after I was born, October of 1992.
Okay, so the next game is 94. So let's talk about Mystic Quest a little bit, Vinny. I believe you had sent me something, right? Wasn't there like an advertisement?
There was an advertisement on the back of a magazine.
Okay, so where is it at? Is it in the
Mystic Quest.
document? Is it in the document?
It is not. It's in Messenger.
Oh, it's
So
in
I
my
don't-
Messenger. Okay, I can
So
get there
need
real
to
quick.
find. Can you? Okay.
Yeah. So tell people about Mystic Quest. Tell everybody about
So-
Mystic Quest.
So Mystic Quest came out in '92, which I think is when the Japanese release of Final Fantasy, what was that? Final Fantasy 3? Like the Japanese Final Fantasy 3? No. What was it?
So Mystic Quest, if it came out in 92, then it was after this game. It was after this
It was
game.
after
Like
this,
a year
so it's,
later. So that
so
kind of goes
Final
to
Fantasy
show,
V?
right? It kind of goes to show that they like these games were a little too complex for America. Like they might have thought like Americans just couldn't handle these games because they literally after releasing Final Fantasy 1 and then after releasing Final Fantasy 4 technically
I hate that.
I guess they were just like, you know what? Maybe we need to kind of dumb this down and get them into it. And that's exactly what they did. They literally dumbed it down. And they even show it in this image. Like in this advertisement, which we're going to bring, which is super weird, by the way. We're going to bring this.
It's a very odd image. It's on the back of a magazine, too. So it's like, it doesn't even get like a prime viewing spot. It's like, let's just throw this on the back. And anyone who sees it sees it. But it was both a way to allow Americans easy integration into JRPGs and also Final Fantasy's way of trying to create a game similar to Legend of Zelda where it's an adventure game but also with a Final Fantasy feel to it, and Mystic Quest is what we got.
So here we are right away, dude. Like, why don't you read that? Why don't you read that? That call to action right there, you know, or not the call to action, but the big headline there.
I don't see what you're seeing.
Oh, you're not seeing it. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll read it. Head lube and an oil change for $39.99.
Not seeing it either.
They're not. Oh, I got a transition. I'm sorry. Here comes the transition. Sorry about that, chat. Head lube and oil change for $39.99.
Right off the bat, it's captivating. It definitely draws attention. You're like, what could this possibly be for?
Head lube and oil change. Get your Final Fantasy Mystic Quest game. Let's bring that up here. There we go. And look at it. Here's the image right there. Oh god, I gotta transition every time. Hold on. Let me get rid of that transition stuff. There we go. So now you'll be able to just see it as I'm moving around. All right. So this is for Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, by the way, just in case.
Yep, you got a dipstick in your brain to check your head lube and oil.
Head lube and oil change for $39.99. Drain your brain pan and fill her up with Mystic Quest, the world's first role-playing game especially designed for the entry-level player. It's got easy-to-read icons, constantly changing 16-bit characters, and lots of heady combat to keep your synapses greased and firing. Pick up the game before January 31st, and we'll throw in a free strategy guide for you freaking idiots. I'm sorry, I read for all for just $39.99. Mystic Quest is a game anybody can dip into. There you go.
Yep. and that is their way of saying, here's an easy version of the game that you guys have been having so much difficulty playing.
Yeah. It's like, okay, look, man, we tried to give you freaking masterpiece Final Fantasy 4. We tried to give you this freaking masterpiece of a game. I'm imagining, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't know the history that well. Like for the sales.
Probably
numbers.
Look it up.
Yeah, look up those sales numbers, man. Because, like, did Final Fantasy 2 not perform well in the North America? And they were just like, hey, why don't we just give them an easy one, and maybe they'll be like, all right, I got to get into this Final Fantasy thing, you know? But there it is. Like, they're literally telling you, like, hey, man, we've dumbed it down to entry level. Howdy, y'all. We know RPGs can be intimidating. Here's a freaking weirdo ad to disturb you. That's great. This is an ad for an entry-level RPG player. You didn't get that? Like, that the messaging wasn't there for you? Like, I totally got that, right? I was like, I needed a head lube and
Alright, so
and an oil change, man. God, who doesn't need a head lube and oil change, you know? We all need it. We all need some head lube and oil changes sometimes. For only $39.99. That's cheaper than Final Fantasy 1 was. The Final Fantasy 3 commercials. Oh yeah. That's coming up next, Drakey. Yeah. All right, so Final Fantasy 3 is coming up next. This was. Are you finding anything, Vinny, or are we gonna close out this episode?
I'm getting a lot of like weird.
Okay.
But I see. It like so. In 1994, the Final Fantasy that came out in 1994, Japan sold 9.25 million copies, and then North America sold 2.25 million copies. So back in the early 90s, Japan was definitely outselling America with the Final Fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the only information I can get. Like 1987, it says for the NES, Japan sold 600,000 copies and America sold 700,000 copies, which doesn't make sense because it wasn't even released in America yet. So
I don't know. I was looking for Drakey's Mystic Quest. He said he wrote a guide for Mystic Quest and it was immature. I was kind of looking for it. I couldn't find it.
Oh
man. All right, so yeah, I'm not too sure about all the numbers there, Vinny, but I'm just assuming that since they dropped in this Mystic Quest a year after that amazing Final Fantasy II game, that's crazy. But it doesn't stop there, Vinny, because we talked about masterpieces for a second. We said Final Fantasy 4 or 2 in North America. I was like, they gave you a masterpiece. What they give North America next is indeed a masterpiece. And we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VI, which is Final Fantasy 3 in North America. So tune in next time when on the 90s week continues. So tomorrow. All right, take care.